today's webinar. Just waiting for a few more folks to hop on. We'll start here shortly, top of the hour. All right, good afternoon all. Welcome to today's webinar, The Future of Cloud Optimization in Healthcare. Today's presenters are Synoptic and AWS. Overview of today's agenda. We're going to be talking about the future of cloud and healthcare operations, digital transformation, and really how the cloud is empowering patient care teams and innovation in the space. We're also going to take a look at some of the cloud concerns for healthcare. We're going to also look at how AWS and Synoptic are helping healthcare organizations overcome many of these challenges. We'll also have a live Q&A answering all of your questions today at the end of the session. A few housekeeping items before we get started. There's a live Q&A box at the bottom left of your screen. Go ahead and enter any questions into that box throughout today's webinar, and we will address them at the end of the session. Now to introduce today's speakers. Scott Ward joins us from Amazon Web Services. Scott's going to be focusing a lot on your questions around HIPAA compliance, data security, really how is AWS positioned to support healthcare operations in the cloud. On the Synoptic side, we have Miles Feinberg, VP of Service Development. Miles is going to talk about the digital transformation of healthcare in cloud. We're going to look at some strategies, really how do you get started in cloud? If you're already in cloud, how can you better manage for performance, costs, operational efficiencies? Miles will address all of that today. And then Martin Gossen, Synoptic's healthcare practice subject matter expert. Martin brings with us today over 25 years of experience in the healthcare space. Martin's going to set the stage for us today. He's going to be speaking a lot on really the triple aim, how the cloud is empowering healthcare. And we're going to get started today. So Martin, over to you, sir.
Thank you very much, Tyler, and thank you, attendee participants. We are really appreciative of your investment and time today, and I'm absolutely thrilled to be part of this team to help start setting the stage for how advantageous the cloud can make a difference in the healthcare space, especially as it relates to improving a patient care or a health user experience while simultaneously reducing costs associated with that circumstance. So I'm in front of healthcare every day, and we're really starting to see some common denominators as it relates to how the cloud can bring an advantageous circumstance. Benefits broadly, obviously, are how do we engage better, how do we empower our teams better, optimize and create positive circumstance. But the reality of that really manifests itself in how are we able to deploy mobile and intelligent devices in a more cost-effective and capable manner, right? Seeing a lot of trend as it relates to how do I utilize all this data that I'm amalgamating on a daily and hourly basis, right? Better business intelligence, better dashboarding for executives and healthcare professionals, right? Spreading that and disseminating that information across teams, right, is becoming a common denominator for how the cloud is being utilized and architected. We've been doing a lot of work as it relates to how do we create better patient engagement strategies across the assisted living scenarios, or even as popular, right? How are we creating a better model to dispatch health and allow for those modern approaches to providing better patient care a reality. So as we start looking about why the cloud is the future of healthcare, some of the common denominator topics are how do we create circumstance that allow us to ease compliance, right? Become more cost effective, that reallocation of IT spend and investment from support of commodity to support of real-life demonstrable health, right, becomes a very large imperative, and cloud architectures are creating the common denominator for how that's getting done. Agility, we've talked about. Scale, we haven't, but reliability and better scale as we bring on new support solutions and customers to manage, become an important component of an IT plan, and cloud architectures are really assisting in providing convenience and better approaches to make that model happen. As we look at these bullet points about remote patient monitoring, I mean, all these points have a lot of value, but at the end of the day, here's a real live example, right? In the future, patients and customers are going to play a much more important role in their own diagnostic and care definition, and cloud architectures are certainly allowing for better data presentation and analytic for that particular circumstance to happen, right? And from an economic benefit perspective, capital expenditure models versus operational expenditure models, having IT resources included in the cost of compute, I mean, these are all massive benefits that we're going to talk about as we move forward through this presentation today. But the grounding of it is really from an operational perspective, how do I get better scale, better agility, better security, and better privacy for lower costs associated with maintaining those particular states. So to continue along in the metaphor, I mean, here's some real live examples for why cloud for healthcare is becoming an imperative that we all must concentrate on. Just from a functionality perspective, for example, cloud-based practice management, the likes of Epic, the likes of Cerner, the likes of McKesson are all going into SaaS models. So as they start putting their customers into that type of circumstance, does that allow us for a broader approach to include cloud into Radiology Pack, for example, or into eClinicalWorks or into pharma, right? Once that established mantra of doing business and conducting compute starts to become common denominator, right? We've got lots of other opportunities to optimize with cloud-based architectures. We just did a large retinal screening situation, right, heavily focused into diagnostic support, for example, all cloud-based. No one is going to be able to, really even gauge early on right now what IBM Watson is going to do to care management support. It could be preeminent, but it certainly could establish a foundation for how those types of practices are continually or upgraded and managed, right? We have a large radiology pack that's using the IBM MergeEye Connect product. That is a 100% cloud-based image handling scenario. So without getting into too much detail as it relates to how it's trending, I mean, there's absolutely no doubt that cloud is going to be preeminent as it relates to providing advantage at reduced cost, right, to practitioner health. And you can look at payer models and other scenarios with equal significance. But on the other side of that coin, as we start looking into the basket of benefits that exist in that portfolio, there's also risk that we have to calculate as it relates to how we blend these types of approaches into what we do. And so with that, I will turn it over to Scott Ward, who will take us through that component of balance. Scott?
Awesome. Thank you so much. Hi, everybody. This is Scott from AWS. I will extend my thanks as well to you for coming on to the webinar today. So when it comes to healthcare companies operating in the cloud, they have lots of concerns. And for today, we're going to look at these concerns in three specific buckets. We have security, risk, and compliance. For the healthcare organizations, they have a pretty high risk profile to start with, and they have a lot of requirements that are being placed on them to protect the data that they collect and the systems that they ultimately operate. And moving to the cloud opens up kind of a whole new group of questions and concerns around how they can actually maintain compliance and the appropriate security profile that they've worked so hard to achieve. Around cost and performance management, these healthcare organizations are also focused a lot on cost and that management. They're often running on some pretty tight budgets and need to ensure that they get the most value for their money. So things like variable expenses sound attractive, but there's concerns around how to truly manage them and ensure that they're really getting the most bang for their buck. And then finally, really things around cloud strategy and expertise. These organizations, may not possess what they think they need to go to the cloud, as well as maybe not even be able to formulate a good strategy that covers the migration and even how they're going to operate once they're migrated. So they may take a look at the resources that they currently have and really not feel confident that they can maintain their current business as they evolve into the cloud. So over the past few years, the importance of healthcare data has really continued to rise. The Medicaid Access and CHIP Reauthorization Act really changes the way that Medicare reimburses doctors, and it focuses on doctors reporting information on the quality of service being given and how valuable that was to the patient. This requires that healthcare providers focus more on actually collecting and retaining more data. Digital radiology and pathology solutions are increasingly able to provide more specific information. And with the advance in genomic data research, researchers are actually able to collect and analyze more data and get down to specific attributes of an individual or a group of individuals. Healthcare providers are also increasingly looking at more and more data sets in order to create a complete insight on a particular item. And these days, not even all these data sets are necessarily clinical. They might be coming from somewhere else. And on top of that, these data sets are often stored in different formats and in different storage locations, really making getting at and analyzing that data a challenge. And then because there's so much healthcare data out there, and because it's becoming very specific and treated as very important, it also becomes very popular for the bad actors out there in the world. You're seeing more and more cyber attacks aimed at getting a hold of that healthcare data or holding it for ransom in order to cause harm or ultimately to reap financial gain. So the data out there is quite important these days. So as the value of healthcare data increases, providers really need to respond to specific data management challenges, with the end goal being to ensure that data is safeguarded as well as enabled to provide better insight. So when it comes to protecting patient information, they need to be able to protect that as best as they can. And as you can see from this slide, there's been a significant increase in the number of breaches that are reported involving protected health information. As I talked about in the previous slide, there is significantly more focus on doing data analysis that comprises multiple data sets, which can be coming from different sources and from different storage locations. And these healthcare organizations are going to need flexible infrastructure solutions that allow them to be able to process and analyze this data in a way that enables them to get an answer quickly without breaking the bank. And then finally, healthcare providers have a responsibility to really ensure that they can meet their business continuity needs. They need to be able to not only protect their data from unauthorized access, but also ensure that the data is being treated in a way that they can recover and continue business operations in the event of a situation that maybe interrupts the normal business operations. With that, Miles, I'm going to hand it over to you for a little bit.
Super. Thank you so much, Scott. Drilling into security and what you said, the threat funnel here is one way to think about why securing patient information can be such a challenge for some organizations. The big number you see there on the left, 2.7 billion, that is the average number of unique transactions that a typical mid-sized organization generates each month. And transactions are things like user logins, file uploads, document edits, and so forth. And naturally, this volume of transaction data is impossible to search through manually. If you were looking at the raw data to identify potential threats, you couldn't. Many organizations have attempted to solve for that by investing in tools, which may use machine learning, AI, and so forth, to identify anomalous events so that these can stand out amongst the background noise of everyday activity. However, even with those tools to cull through the events, it reduces those 2.7 billion further down that threat funnel to about 2,500 anomalous events each month to look through. So an example of anomalous event would be when a user logs in from 2 locations in a very short time span. However, 2,500 events a month, that's still a lot to look through, considering that less than 1% of those anomalous events turn out to be actual incidents further down that threat funnel where you see 23.2. So, even if you're lucky to have security professionals, they're suffering from what we call alert fatigue. Half of enterprises have already invested in 6 or more tools. Maybe this resonates with you. These generate an abundance of alerts, and 31.9% of security professionals ignore those alerts because there's just too many false positives. Agile organizations today are seeing business improvements and operational efficiencies like never before. Much of these improvements and efficiencies are due to taking advantage of technological innovations and agility provided predominantly by, you guessed it, cloud. However, to adopt cloud, organizations need skills such as virtual networking, configuration management, containers, cloud monitoring, analytics, cloud security, and that's just to name a few. Organizations today are undergoing these digital transformations to become more agile and cost efficient. Yet 83% recognize that cloud skills are vital to achieving that transformation. Unfortunately, 2 in 5 firms report they simply cannot hire the cloud skills they need. Scott?
Sorry, everybody. Yeah, so let's take a look a little bit here about how these health organizations can overcome some of those concerns that we talked about earlier on in this presentation. And let's start with the first bucket around security and risk and compliance. So we're going to talk through how an organization can actually overcome some of these and feel more confident in operating in the cloud and help you better understand what AWS and Synopsys can offer in that space. So when we talk about security, risk, and compliance, on the AWS side, we view security as job zero. We take great pride in ensuring that our customers are operating in a safe and secure environment. We have a lot of customers in the enterprise, public sector, and the startup space, and many of these customers have compliance requirements that they have to adhere to. And in order to enable these customers to be able to run on AWS and continue to meet their compliance requirements, we have a large focus around compliance. We actually have over 50 global compliance certifications and accreditations, with Hipaa being one of those. We have an entire compliance team who works with our third-party auditors to actually ensure that the AWS portion of the shared responsibility model, which we're going to talk about in a minute, is actually operating at the requirements of these compliance organizations. And then we make these third-party attestations available to our customers so they can actually understand what AWS is doing to ensure their compliance. We have a global security team that is working 24/7, 365 days a year around the world. It's the responsibility of these security teams to work with our service teams to ensure that they are folding the right security features into the services that they're offering up to our customers, and that they're making the right security features available for customers to configure. When it comes to our roadmap, I'd say 90 to 95% of our product roadmap is actually based on customer feedback. It's very, very much driven by what our customers want. And we have a pretty tough set of customers who have some pretty stringent security requirements. And so when this happens, AWS works to make sure that they make their security requirements available in the AWS platform. But when we do this, we don't do it just for that one customer who was asking for something. We actually would make these features available to all of our customers so that they all actually get to take advantage of these security features that they probably could never actually implement on their own. And so at the end of the day, AWS has been able to implement security infrastructure that satisfies some of the most security sensitive organizations in the world, whether it be banks, military, or other highly sensitive organizations. So currently, when it comes to healthcare and Hipaa specifically, AWS has over 40 HIPAA-enabled services allowing you to use AWS to address the design criteria. These services allow you to build and run HIPAA-compliant applications that are going to either store or process or transmit that protected health information. We have a BAA addendum available that lists all of the compliance services, and we have services that are covering a pretty wide range of areas that you would need when it comes to healthcare. We have services around compute, storage, various database services, things around managed big data, talking a lot about those big data sets and various data formats we were talking about earlier, services around archiving and data warehousing and networking. More specifically, there's ways that we actually will help fulfill that healthcare data design criteria. So around flexible ingestion and optimizing streaming of structured and unstructured data. So healthcare data is increasingly becoming from a variety of new sources, as we mentioned earlier, and the ability to ingest this data is a current and a future need for a lot of healthcare customers. So AWS has infrastructure that allows customers to scale and be able to actually handle the future demands of this critically important data ingestion. When it comes to storing a variety of data types and lifecycle management, the requirements for data vary based on the type of data and how it's being used. And it doesn't really, there's not really a one-size-fits-all approach that works for this anymore. It's difficult to actually scale it and extremely costly to take a one-size-fits-all approach. So additionally, there's a lot of traditional storage solutions such as Iron Mountain that don't provide you any easy visibility of the data who's actually accessed that data. So with AWS, you get multiple storage solutions to choose from to best meet your data storage needs. And those needs may change over time, and it allows you to switch to different solutions. When it comes to providing a secure networking environment, there's more and more data that's being shared across various players in the healthcare space, and it's critical that as healthcare providers, you can supply a secure environment for patient data, and AWS provides the tools necessary to create and secure your networking environment. You also have the ability to actually protect and secure critical data. It's one of the most important parts when it comes to operating in healthcare, and this it's one of the most valuable assets when it comes to healthcare providers. So we have the ability to secure that data. As I mentioned before, security is one of our top priorities. We have over 2,000 security controls which can actually be applied to your data and fall as part of the shared responsibility model. We have the ability to provide and maintain HIPAA-required audit controls. So AWS enables its services and provides the capabilities for customers to actually meet the audit demands required by HIPAA. And we have a collection of services that allow you to do that in a cost-effective way. Services such as CloudWatch that lets you monitor your resources. CloudTrail, you give an audit of every AWS service call made, and config that will actually let you track the inventory that you're running in AWS. And finally, things around data resiliency for disaster recovery and backup. And AWS has a wide variety of disaster recovery and backup scenarios that are more cost-effective, but also very capable of meeting or outperforming maybe some of the traditional disaster recovery and backup solutions that are out there. So this is something that a lot of our customers are able to take advantage of and allows them to kind of reimagine and figure out where their footprint ultimately needs to be in the cloud. Okay, Mr. Miles, back to you.
Thanks, Scott. So if you're chartered with ensuring security and compliance, and not just HIPAA, any compliance, and I saw questions in the chat around other compliance, in AWS, you need to understand AWS's shared security model. And by leveraging AWS, you effectively outsource a fair portion of security responsibility to a best-of-breed cloud provider. Scott shared already how AWS is delivering rock-solid physical security. They have invested tremendously in tight control over their shared services. They have a vast team of security professionals keeping close watch. And we could have a whole webinar on just how that's done. However, the point I want to make here is in this shared security model, the customer still has many responsibilities in security and compliance themselves. For example, you as an AWS customer, you need to harden your instance configurations by disabling unnecessary services and overriding insecure default settings. Your applications need to be patched and properly configured. You need to set up and monitor CloudWatch. You need to run vulnerability scans and pen testing, and you need to remediate the deficiencies that are uncovered. And last but not least, you need to manage the storage of PHI. Are they encrypted at rest and in transit? You need to ensure that the tools are set up to do so. In this shared security model, AWS owns the security of the cloud at the bottom of the screen, and either you or a partner like Synoptic owns securing what you put in the cloud, the area in red at the top. Scott, right back to you.
Awesome. Cool. Thanks, Miles. Let's take a minute and talk about that next bucket that we covered earlier on and talk a little bit about cost and performance management and some of the things that can help you when it comes to AWS and Synoptic in that area. So we look at the AWS side. There are opportunities to get rid of some of those time-consuming and often expensive tasks. And by expensive, I mean either financially or just straight human capital. You have the ability to move away from some of the a lot of the upfront capital expense you maybe had to deal with normally when it comes to infrastructure and running data centers, and move to more of a variable expense approach. You don't have to go through and decide what infrastructure you want from a catalog and work with a vendor and give them a check and then wait for that infrastructure to show up. It might take weeks or months or years, and when it gets there, you have to wait for it to be cabled, and in some cases it's not what you need anymore. In other cases, somebody else has made a better case and it's actually taken your infrastructure for you. So you're able to kind of go and now get the infrastructure you need when you need it. You also, what that means is you get to stop guessing at your capacity planning. You no longer have to provision for peak right from the get-go. You can provision for what's needed at the current point in time, and then you can grow or shrink your resources depending on what's currently needed from your application or your workload, and you only pay for what you need during the time that you're actually using it. What this does, it removes a lot of the infrastructure management that really probably adds very little value to your business. It allows you to kind of move from that undifferentiated heavy lifting and focus your IT and your security professionals on what you're running at the top of the shared responsibility model, and really ultimately improve the things that are probably the differentiators for what you're doing as a business. And finally, the ability to go global in minutes. So building a data center is hard. Building a data center halfway around the world is probably even harder. With AWS, you're able to take advantage of our global presence in our 18 different regions and allow you to launch your applications and your workloads where it makes sense to meet the needs of your internal, your external customers, the ability to create and launch the copy of that workload somewhere else around the world, whether it be for disaster recovery or to meet growing demands of customers in a new part of the world for you. Okay, Miles, want to continue us on?
Yeah, Scott, thanks. All of that cloud flexibility that you just covered, Scott, it drives a genuine issue around cost management. In fact, there's often a large gap between planned costs and reality. And inexperienced firms find cloud costs blowing a hole in their budgets. A whole new set of policies are needed to govern cloud consumption because there weren't the same consequences in the use of on-premise hardware. So if I go around the circle here from kind of the top left, right sizing, for example, 39% of instance spends on over-provisioned virtual machines. So those are VMs that are using less than 40% of their CPU and memory. Right sizing those over-provisioned VMs can eliminate that waste. That means, for example, if an application running on a machine with 16 gig of RAM really needs to run on a VM with 7 gig of RAM, you reassign it to an instance with 7 gig of RAM and achieve efficiency. Scheduled usage. So the majority of enterprises are running instances 24/7. But if they're serving a largely 8x5 workforce, then those VMs could be scheduled to only be in use during business hours. And not doing that is as wasteful as leaving all the lights on your home every day, every time you leave the house. Further, just trash in general in the cloud. So what I mean by that is, for example, 7% of all cloud spend is wasted on unattached storage and old snapshots. That's a lot of spend on storage that isn't being used. And then I want to touch briefly on platform as a service. So when most people think about adopting cloud, they're thinking about getting out of the hardware business, getting out of the data center business, trading CapEx for OpEx. They're thinking about that cost efficiency Scott alluded to, paying for just the compute and storage that they need and only when they need it. They think about the operational efficiencies they'll achieve by easily being able to spin services up and down. But platform as a service offerings, these take you to a whole new level. And let's use Amazon Relational Database Service just as a brief example. RDS, that kind of service means you no longer need to license the database. You don't need to patch it. You don't need to think about the instance size and upgrading it. You just pay for what you use. You leave the rest to AWS, and you achieve much greater cost and much greater operational efficiencies. And then the last two circles really talk towards understanding the purchasing options that AWS gives, that if you understand them, you can achieve really deep cost efficiency. You can buy on demand for spiky workloads, but if you have a long-term stable usage need, you can save over 50% with reserved instances. And you can also purchase on the AWS spot market and pay a fluctuating but heavily discounted rate even for short-term usage needs. So Synopsec, my firm, today provides cost management to its customers based on all the opportunities I just covered. Now I want to cover our strategy and expertise around managing AWS workloads. And this model you see here on the screen is one we've refined over the course of serving many healthcare clients. You can certainly adopt a model like this as your own. But if I kind of to walk you through this from the left, the strategy, what we do is we start by understanding a firm's key business drivers and their time constraints. We want to know the metrics for success and document that. And then as we move into a discovery phase, we really drill into technical constraints and requirements. For example, are there dependencies on legacy applications or legacy operating systems that aren't supported in the cloud? Are there unique latency requirements like you might have with patient bedside systems? And of course, we look at PHI data storage, at rest and in transit. There could be business constraints, licensing restrictions like Oracle or Microsoft licenses that don't have mobility rights perhaps. Maybe you have a warranty or a support agreement that's about to renew, and that would be a big expense and therefore potentially a time constraint. Deeper still in discovery, we're going to dive into a customer's existing physical and virtual environments. We measure the application workloads. We do this so we can map them to the best fit amongst a really large and complex amount of possible machine instance types, storage types, and so forth in AWS. And to do that, we have to have detailed performance measurements, peak CPUs, storage capacity, IOPS, and so forth. Using that data from discovery, we can look at all the applications and their suitability to running in the cloud. We can understand the effort to migrate the different workloads, looking at the whole complex set of activities, firewall rules, DNS, the need for dedicated connections, authentication requirements, and so forth. This all feeds into migration planning, where we group applications based on dependencies and essentially prioritize what are the low-hanging fruit that can go into early migration phases, get us a quick win in ROI and lower risk, what should be in later migration phases, and maybe really what should stay, quite frankly, on-premise. And as you move ultimately to the far right of this framework, as you go into an operational support of what's in AWS, now much of Synoptic's approach centers around this continuous de-risking of our customer's environment. And we do that in several ways. There's 24/7 support. We have a team of support engineers and certified cloud architects to respond to customers around the clock. And we route customers to our purely North American-based team and to the staff members that are most familiar with that customer's environment. And we maximize uptime by proactively monitoring our customers' workload performance, the platform activity, trends in utilization. We're looking for anything that could disrupt the customer's business and perform the necessary remediation, ideally, before the issue ever happens. And a big part of de-risking an environment is managing recoverability through things like availability zones and the other tools that AWS provides, as well as through the basic solid backups. All of the cost containment that I discussed previously also becomes a regular routine conversation we have with our clients about ensuring cost efficiency, looking at those things I mentioned, right-sizing, idle or underutilized resources, and so forth. Security management is an ongoing activity. We regularly scan cloud workloads against hundreds of best practice checks. We're looking at through the APIs, and we're culling through anomalies. We're deploying advanced malware protection, and we regulate patching systems. And with customers that have even more rigid security requirements, we'll assign a virtual Chief Information Security Officer, CISO, along with Synoptic's security team. And that team is assigned to closely watch those systems for the anomalies and investigate suspicious activities. And lastly, the promise of cloud is this transformation, taking things to the next level. And we do that by assigning a dedicated advisor who's going to understand each customer's business, provide ongoing strategic guidance. That advisor's job is to analyze the customer organization's performance gaps, redundancies, inefficiencies, recommend improvement strategies, and ultimately develop and track to a technology roadmap. Scott, back to you once again.
Awesome. Sure. Thank you. So let's talk about what things look like once you've actually made the move into the cloud and you're up and running. The cloud offers you not only the ability to just kind of take what you're running now and run it maybe in a cheaper, more efficient way, but it also offers you new opportunities to innovate. And one of those is readily available infrastructure. So we've talked about that before as even maybe just a basic item for the cloud. But one of the interesting things that offers you when it comes to a new opportunity is that you're able to get infrastructure to use for short periods of time, potentially to execute on tests or proofs of concept that you would never have done in your own data center due to the inability to get the infrastructure or it was just too costly. And so you now have some new opportunities to maybe take some of those things that are it required a little bit more of an investment in infrastructure but had maybe more potential to be successful, and maybe go and experiment with those now because you can get your access to that infrastructure so quickly and be able to use it for just the amount of time that you need it. If you take a look at the AWS platform, which we'll show you in just a minute, there's a growing range of analytics-focused services that are out there, and we're continuing to add more and enhance the ones that are there. And we talked about the ability to kind of take in lots of different types of data to be able to fully get at and analyze and maybe answer a question in the healthcare space. So as you're running on the AWS platform, you have more and more of your data located there. The analytic services that you can use will continue to grow and improve. And on top of this is the Aws Pace of Innovation. So in 2017, we launched over 1,300 new services or features to the AWS platform. And so what that's really showing you is that over time, the platform continues to evolve and add new features and functions that you maybe had to build yourself or can just now take advantage of to solve problems that you've always had and now maybe can get out in front of. So if we take a look, this is kind of an eye chart here, but this is the representation of the overall AWS platform, and it's quite large. And when I talk about kind of the core foundational stuff, let's take a look at the areas around the infrastructure, the networking, maybe the compute and the storage and the database. Those are kind of some of the core things that you might see a customer use when they're just moving to AWS, kind of servers and storage and things that they might be running in their own data center. But what you'll see is that once you're really on the AWS platform and start to really get comfortable with it, there's all these things that exist above those core services that are unique to AWS that you can really start to harness and grow what you're doing on the platform. Things around analytics, as we talked about earlier, a whole set of things in the IoT space. If you're looking at AI and machine learning, there's a growing collection of tools in that space, things around mobile and enterprise applications. And so there's a lot of opportunities to continue to evolve your business and continue to innovate once you're on the AWS platform, and it's not just running as a steady state from what you had before in your own data center. And back to you, Mr. Miles.
Sorry for the pause there.
Sure.
Actually, I think we have yourself here.
It's me. Sorry. Thank you. So there's one on the AWS side. We have one case study I'd like to share with you about a customer who was very successful with AWS. So Claritas Genomics was a division that split off from Boston Children's Hospital several years ago. And after that split, they had a very limited budget. They lost their access to that large data center that was normally available to them when they were part of Children's Hospital. But they still needed to, they were still going to keep doing the work they were doing, but they needed to be able to meet HIPAA requirements. So they had some big decisions in front of them as far as how they were going to be able to move forward and run their business and still be able to deliver. And so they decided to go and move forward with implementing on AWS. And they leveraged a lot of those core services that I talked about earlier, EC2, S3, block storage, our virtual private network. And when they got up and running, and they really found some very interesting results. They were able to deliver their clinical results in a much faster time frame than the normal industry standard. They actually were able to get to about 4 to 6 weeks, which is about 75% faster than the normal industry. They were able to avoid that big data center build. Remember, they were basically locked out of the data center they'd had access to before, so they were able to avoid having to go in and build their own data center to do what they wanted. They were able to take a much more agile focus in how they develop things, maybe able to deliver and roll things out in a more iterative fashion and more quickly. And overall, they actually were able to take their monthly cost and get that decreased by 36% month over month. So a great example of a healthcare or a life sciences customer who was able to kind of not be in the cloud and have to make some big decisions. They were really able to leverage the cloud to allow their business to be able to move forward. And Martin, I'll let you cover the other one.
Well, thank you, Scott. What a great example of innovation versus operations. So let's extend that metaphor, to a rural circumstance where you've got, even more exponential challenges, right? Yampa Valley Medical Center is a preeminent healthcare provider in northern Colorado and Steamboat specifically, and challenges that they were having before Synoptic and AWS approached them were obviously they're remote, hard to find good IT personnel. Incumbent infrastructure is pretty bad, but still they have to be a provider of health, a preeminent provider of health. So challenges that they had before we went in there revolved around IT maturity, shoulder taps, and reaction to healthcare issues, IT issues were coming at a great expense of eliminating a strategic backlog that would allow them to continue to represent better health to that area, and costly services associated with practicing, no ability to represent a good hypercare level of escalation to VIPs and to doctors. So when we found it was in a state of disrepair, and we had to go in and basically represent an IT assessment that was really focused not only on business impact analysis, but how can the cloud bring these guys any kind of circumstance of advantage. So we rolled that out, and upon discovering what the core issues were, put together a plan that we could define, deploy, and sustain to make things better. And really, at the end of the day, the end result was that we provided a much better end-user experience while simultaneously bringing cost reduction, cost savings to bear so they could continue to finance on-prem radiology, on-prem OBGYN, as opposed to outsourcing that or having that be a call-based scenario. So a profound circumstance remedied in a very short period of time that continued to allow these guys to roll out a business model that continues to allow them to be the best healthcare provider in that part of the state. Back to you.
Thanks, Martin. And thanks to our participants for hanging in this far. We're at the home stretch. You'll be glad you did. And at this point, you may be a bit overwhelmed, so let me summarize. If you're an organization that is already in AWS and need governance, security, and a path towards greater business agility, I covered how we at Synoptic can partner with your organization to help. On the other hand, if you're like most organizations that still has cloud on your roadmap and you're ready for that critical first step, those first steps include proper planning that answers the critical business questions. It's measured. It ensures successful migration and leads to smooth operation. And that first step is Synoptic's Cloud Readiness Assessment. And in that, we analyze your IT systems to advise, to deliver answers to all those million-dollar questions that you have. The technical questions: what workloads are feasible to move to AWS? What workloads are practical to move to AWS? The business questions: what will our cloud operational costs become, and what's the ROI for applications and services migrated to the cloud? What's going to be the impact to our employees? What's going to be the impact to our customers? And to help get there, Tyler?
Thank you, Miles, and Scott and Martin. Great presentation. Before we jump into the live Q&A, we've had a few questions come in. We really want to offer, if you aren't already in the cloud, really the best and the first step that you're going to need, and as Miles mentioned, it's going to be that cloud readiness assessment. So we're offering attendees on today's webinar that planning, migration, assessment service for a POV. So simply just type in Cloud Express into that chat box on your left. We'll reach out to you to further plan that. So a couple of questions that have come through the box today. I'm going to start with this one for you, Scott. So I believe you touched on this earlier, but maybe if you could explain a little bit more detail. Do you have a thorough BAA with documented and communicated policies? I know this is under the HIPAA standards, so maybe if you could touch on that a bit more on how AWS is positioned there with the BAA.
Sure. So we have a full BAA available that customers can come in and get a copy of and evaluate. And if you actually just search on AWS and HIPAA, you will find our public page that talks about HIPAA and actually can show you exactly all the fine-grained details about our BAA and all the AWS services that are covered by that BAA agreement, and probably even some more details that I'm not covering as well to help you answer your BAA questions. But I would definitely just recommend going to that public site, and it will be much more in-depth than what I had spoken to today as far as what the BAA offers. Excellent.
Thank you. Here's a kind of a more high-level question that came in. Miles, I'm going to tee this one up for you. Can you explain in a bit more detail the relationship that Synoptic and AWS has? What does that kind of landscape look like? How I think we demonstrated today on this webinar some of the benefits of the partnership, but maybe if you could explain that in a little bit more detail.
Sure thing, Tyler. So we are a managed partner. We have, if you will, a direct line to a partner management team, direct channels. We have our own direct support agreement, mitigating the need for customers to have those things directly. And of course, we've invested by sending our staff to achieve those certifications and regularly partaking in the partner training, not only around the core expertise around AWS, but availing ourselves at providing solutions in healthcare. So really, by having that foundation built, an organization doesn't really need to understand and think about the platform, about the fact that underneath it is AWS, because there is one hand to shake, and that is Synoptic. If someone were to work with us, that has all of the solutions and SLA capability to deliver on the cloud promise.
Excellent. Thank you for that clarity. If anyone else has questions, please input into the box. Again, we've got Martin Gosson, our healthcare subject matter expert. We've got Scott from AWS and Miles as well. So we're happy to take any questions. We have a couple more minutes here. I know we're running a little bit over, but we want to make sure that we address any questions from today's webinar. A lot of questions about the copy and recording of today's presentation. We will absolutely send all attendees the PDFs as well as the recordings. You can share that with your teams. If you have any questions after your teams watch that, again, we're happy to provide any guidance or answer any questions directly. So we'll send that out after today's presentation. All right, that looks like the majority of the questions. Martin, Miles, or Scott, do you guys have any closing comments for the audience?
This is Scott. I'll just say, first of all, thanks for taking your time today. I'd say if you have any, kind of general questions when it comes to security or compliance when it comes to healthcare, AWS has a lot of public information. If you just go to our compliance website, aws.amazon.com/compliance, it will get you pointed in the right path as far as any compliance areas that you're concerned with, and then aws.amazon.com/security. We'll get you pointed at some of the high-level stuff for your security questions, which I think are super important things you're going to want to answer when it comes to the cloud.
Absolutely. Yeah, and Tyler, really thank you for allowing me to participate. This is a very exciting time to be an IT professional in health. It literally is. I've been in it for 25 years, and I have seen very few instances where specific types of focuses around these architectures can really provide demonstrable benefit, especially as it relates to providing better health. So it's fun to be part of this new era, and if anyone has any questions on how to leverage it or how Synoptic and Amazon has had demonstrable success in the past, please let me know, and I'm happy to carry on those dialogues with you.
And I'll close, this is Miles, that while there's certainly a sales component to this, and we'd love to serve anyone as customer, even if you're not, we look at this as a community resource that we provide. We speak regularly at in-person seminars and webinars. We're happy to assist. And prospect or not, feel free to reach out to any of us. You can reach me on LinkedIn. Look me up, Miles Feinberg on LinkedIn. Happy to answer any questions.
Excellent. Thank you all for joining today's webinar. Have a great day.
Have an excellent day. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.